Well, two distinct intros for two distinct gentlemen of the bar, and I'm not talking about the yard arm. Good morning, chaps.
Morning, Keith. I should say, hello, good morning, Philip.
Well, good morning to you both, and the man and his canine friend.
Yes, exactly. The dog will be yelping. You'll be glad to know, Phil, and you know this already. I bought Keith a little slice of cake on the basis that the sugar rush would mean that he won't fall asleep when we have this very dull conversation this morning.
Yes, it is going to be dull because it's going to be predominantly from you, because it's a subject you have chosen and about which I know precious little. So I'm just the eye candy this morning.
And how so? You know, Love Island have missed a trick with you there, I tell you, Phil.
Oh, but that's been the story of my life, B1. The story of my life.
Such a handsome chap, he's going to take the audience away from us, isn't he?
Well, exactly, yes.
Yeah. I'm not sure we should have you on this morning, Phil.
So Phil, what I was going to talk about with you this morning, if that's okay, is family law. And before I say anything about it, I'd like you to tell me your views as a former dyed-in-the-wool criminal practitioner. So I think I'm right in saying the vast majority of your career, you only dealt with criminal cases.
Correct.
Is that right?
What's your view ironically,
Yes.
Well, just to begin at the beginning, when I was...
That's the best in. It's a very good place
depends
to
who
start.
you are. I would never start at the beginning with you.
No, and I wouldn't want to be anywhere near your end either. So that's fine.
No, but I mean the thought of your prologue is frankly nauseating. But anyway,
thank you.
When I was in pupillage, in other words, my apprenticeship.
Yes.
Where, as we've told the viewer, the first 6 months you're not on your feet. You are an observer, and therefore you have more time on your hands. I taught at what was then the Polytechnic of Central London. I taught the bar finals. And one of the subjects I taught, because I'd done it at university, was family law.
Oh, good.
I've forgotten most of it. In practice, I used to do what you might call the quasi-criminal sort of family cases. So injunctions, the wife that was beaten up by the drunken husband on the Saturday night, turning up at Wilsden County Court on the Monday morning or not turning up, and so on. So I was never involved with the, as you're going to be telling the audience, the real nitty-gritty of family work, which spans a number of categories, as you will enlighten the viewer, ranging from pure financial to a full-on divorce, as well as childcare, child welfare, and so on. Personally, it's the sort of law that I deliberately chose not to follow up. I'm aware, of course, that then, and indeed now, it is far better remunerated, and in a much fairer way, given what the family lawyer does behind the scenes as well as in court. But that never really attracted me because of the nature of the work. And having shared chambers, particularly at Westgate before I retired, with family lawyers who knew they had a certain amount of financial muscle within chambers, as well as the work they did, I found them very difficult people to deal with.
Yes, I wonder what they'd say about you, Philip. But,
Oh, they hated me, particularly when I was joint head of chambers.
yeah. So family law, as you've said, it breaks into various different categories. And I want to talk about divorce to begin with, because when I got married, I said to Mrs. B that I felt I could marry her because I thought that we would divorce amicably. I know that's not a very good reason for getting married. There were other reasons as well.
Well, it is the cart before the horse a touch, isn't it?
Well, but the other side of it is that people do get, they tumble into bed with people who they think are just exciting and wild.
Why are you talking in the third person here?
Exactly, yeah. And but in fact, then it becomes very bitter, a divorce. And when I used to do family work, one of the things that I would often wish to say but wasn't able to say was, "Why did you marry them in the first place?"
Well, people do, and
Yeah.
I mean, I have a number of examples in my own little world. I have examples of perfectly amicable splits and very sensible post-nuptial and post-divorce agreements. And I know examples of people who've been at each other's throats, having been married for a long, long time, over 40 years, and who became so embittered that they squandered most of the money on grasping family lawyers.
When you say your little world, is that your little world of Lego that you have in the spare room there?
No, I got rid of that 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
I've got a train set now.
Oh, good.
Brilliant. Excellent. Okay.
Good.
Okay.
We can
Because
share.
there's a wonderful model railway shop just up the road from me near Ford Station that is internationally known. This is serious. And it's just a marvelous shop. It's run by a load of weirdos, but it's a wonderful shop. Anyway, no, so I've got rid of the Lego.
Back to
I spent last night trying to do super glue to glue a fruit tree in the garden of my Engage farm.
I think that would be a euphemism for something.
I mean, Richard, as a matter of interest, how big was that slice of biscuit you bought Keith? Because he's still munching on it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It was a giant one.
It was a bloke out on the street, and he was selling these muffins, and he said, give him one of those, and who knows what will happen.
Shut him up for good.
Yeah. Anyway,
well, Richard, returning to divorce.
Yes.
In the days of my in-laws, my father and mother-in-law, divorce was scandalous.
Well, I was going to go back before that, if you don't mind, Philip.
Yeah, please do.
Because back in the day, long before either of us practiced, you simply couldn't get a divorce, could you?
You couldn't.
It wasn't. You had to have a private member's Act of Parliament to get a divorce.
Indeed, so.
Unless you were rich, it never happened.
No.
And then it changed, and people could start getting divorces. And you may know this, Phil, that the family law was thought so low that in fact there was a division of the High Court called the Probate, Divorce and Admiralty Division, and they deal with all those three subjects at the same time. So how your money is disposed when you die, how you separate if you've been married, and what happens out at sea. And it was said to be the division for the wrecks of wills, marriages, and boats.
That's good.
That's
good,
yeah,
Richard.
that is true. And that didn't end until 1970. They got rid of that and
No,
actually made a family division.
I'm trying to remember, there was a landmark act around that time that it didn't quite change everything, but it changed an awful lot. Maybe I've got the date wrong.
No, there have been a number of pieces of legislation around that time. Yeah.
But which was the statute that actually encoded the reasons for getting divorced that were available based on the irretrievable breakdown? Which statute was that?
That came a bit later, I think.
Because you have to establish
Family Law Act 78, maybe. I haven't looked at it for a long time.
Well, no, because it's not your main type of work. Although you do have the skills to do it once in a while, don't you?
Well, I'm not sure about that. I get forced into doing it once in a while. I did one last week. But divorces at that time, and I think we've spoken about this before, Keith. The actual divorce itself required a fully contested court hearing. So if you wanted to claim, and there are various ways in which you can get a divorce. There's 2 years and consent, which is the easiest and obvious one, where, in other words, both parties agree after 2 years
of separation.
Yeah, they need to be separated. 5 years without the consent of the other party. So that's the minimum time that you have to wait if your partner won't play ball. Your former partner won't play ball in terms of that. Unreasonable behaviour, which is often a sort of rather spurious basis that people fudge just in order to get the divorce as soon as possible. And the other, of course, is adultery, or it still is adultery. And Keith, you may have heard the term. What would happen is that people, that's a divorce like that. And so what would happen is that the fellow would say, "Oh, I'm going to divorce you," and she'd say, "Yes, that's fine. We'll get divorced, and we'll get divorced now." And she would check into a hotel room and leave a pair of men's shoes outside the door. And they were known as co-respondent shoes, because the co-respondent is the person who you're said to have committed adultery with. And co-respondent shoes are always sort of described as being two-tone brogues, really, cad's shoes. And that is what used to happen on a regular basis. And it wasn't that she had anybody in the room with her. It was just it got around that tricky bit of the law.
Were you able to find shoes like that fitted you, Richard?
I went to the children's shoe fitter.
Yes.
And yeah. Unlike you, Phil, who I imagine had to go to the clown shop because you got such enormous feet.
Yeah, the clown shop or High and Mighty.
Yeah.
You probably didn't know of the existence of a shop called High and Mighty, but there we are.
I'm just trying to work out a suitable anagram of that for you, Phil. It might need an S in it.
Yes, move on.
Actually, all these machinations are quite modern, because the last wife sale took place in Hailsham as late as 1926.
Yep.
Well, it's the mayor of Casterbridge.
Absolutely.
It's the mayor of Casterbridge.
Yeah.
Michael Henchard.
Yes.
Selling his wife.
Yes. They were quite wonderful occasions, apparently. I mean, a little earlier than 1926, is they sort of hold a party and you get jugglers and that sort of thing going around pleasing the crowd while they took a look at the chain of wives that were up for sale.
It's unimaginable, really, but
so divorce, there's increasingly a move towards completely no-fault divorces. The actual act of divorce in itself is very, very rarely contested nowadays at all.
Well, what I don't know is there was certainly a bill going through Parliament that
still on.
Literally absolved either party from any fault whatsoever. Now, whether that was passed, whether that's in law, I don't think it is yet.
No, it's not. I once went to, I may have told you this before, and I apologize to the dog who's now howling at the camera saying, you've told us this before.
The dog wants a treacle biscuit.
Yeah. I went to Slough County Court for a contested divorce, but in fact it had gone through that. There's a sort of process nowadays where they just go through on the nod, so neither party needs to attend, and just a district judge rubber stamps it as a divorce. And my client, the wife, had obtained such an order. And she obtained it on the basis that her husband was, I think the term I'm looking for is a nutter. He was actually in. He was in an instance.
Oh, that's brilliant.
He was obsessed. He was obsessed with staying married to her. So I pitched up and I thought, right, okay, this is going to be fine. I'm just going to go along and say, he may have said this, he may have said that, but so what? He's not here. Oh no. They gave him a day pass out of the institute that he was in. He turned up at Slough County Court while still being sectioned under the Mental Health Act. And he beat me.
Well, that speaks volumes.
It does speak volumes, doesn't it? Yeah.
You may remember, just reverting back to crime, that an ex-colleague of yours developed a reputation of losing prosecution cases where there was no defendant.
Yes, no defendant, no defense representative. It was over here in court 4 that one of them happened.
Well, there was 2. It happened at least twice, but the famous one was the one we know about. Yeah. Anyway, back to family law. Sorry.
No, not at all. So I think we probably said enough about divorce, Philip. You and I will need to get divorced if that's okay.
Well, that's easy. I mean, irretrievable breakdown. It's obvious.
It's very obvious between us. It's very obvious. I suppose the next area is what used to be called ancillary relief.
Yeah.
That is ancillary meaning on the side. And very many divorces involve a bit on the side. I can tell you that now.
Oh, absolutely. Over the side. Yeah.
But it concerns the division of the finances.
And that's the real nitty gritty. That's where things can get very, very nasty.
Well, because very often couples barely afford to live together in one house. So if you say, right, now you're going to live separately, completely in different places, there's not enough money to go around, and people can get, as you say, get very bitter about it. Interestingly, on that subject, generally it's needs is the basis of it. So who needs what? Are there children who have needs? That sort of thing. Very, very rarely, particularly bad behaviour on one of the parties' part can lead to an adjustment of that. But it's a tiny proportion of them. And there are a whole range of ways in which these things can happen. Things like a measure order. In other words, you, the one who's not looking after the children, you will get half the house, but you won't get it until the children are of an age. So your portion of it is sort of held there for you, and you will get it at a later date. And people don't like that, of course. But...
No, they don't. The living example I can cite, with no names at all, unusual for me, I know, but I'll be very careful, is where the wife, post-divorce, is claiming that she has supported the husband in his business.
Yep.
Throughout, whether in kind or actual money.
Yep.
And they argue about that, not the children. The example I'm thinking of, the children were not an issue, but the business was a...
Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's it really. But it was incredibly acrimonious. And you know the old Regency cartoon of the cow?
Yes.
And you've got the plaintiff...
Exactly, yeah.
You've got the plaintiff at one end, the respondent at the other, whatever you call them, at the tail, and then you've got this enlarged caricature of an udder, and there's a lawyer sitting there milking the udder. The cow being the family finances that are draining away into the lawyer's coffers.
Family divorce finances. It's always said, a third for the husband, third for the wife, third for the lawyers. Yeah, completely. Because people can pay an extortionate amount of money. And when I used to do family law, it always struck me as an interesting question, whether it was better to go back to contested actual divorces.
Yeah.
The first thing I spoke about. Because then people could vent their spleen and as opposed to dealing with it through the money, which is often what happens nowadays. And
it's a contested divorce by proxy, as you say, through the money.
Yeah.
And being as difficult as possible.
And I regret to say that there are some lawyers who will pander to their clients' wishes regardless, and will say, no, that's a really good point. We'll do that. And, you'd get 14 letters in a day passing between the solicitors, and each letter, of course, costing a lot of money.
And in the example I'm citing, there were regular court hearings with advocates of any type appearing, often in the Bear Garden, at the High Court, the Royal Courts. And it was obscene, really. But there we are.
So far, we've agreed that you shouldn't get married and you shouldn't get divorced. I think that's what we've agreed, isn't it?
Yes, well, it's really a policy for life, isn't it?
Yeah.
I certainly, I mean, in all seriousness and speaking personally, I agree with the second. You shouldn't get divorced.
No.
Unless things are absolutely desperate.
Yes,
you just shouldn't do it. Or if you're going to do it, you do it by agreement.
Yeah. You know, if you've got somebody who's being abusive or is making your life unbearable, that's a different point. But if it's simply, oh, we don't get along very well, just learn to live with that. You know, have your separate lives, be under the same roof, but just.
Well, there's this term that's bandied around, a quickie divorce. What does that mean?
A quickie divorce. Well, that just means that you have a divorce based upon typically behaviour, because that's the easiest one to prove. And so one side's lawyers cook up sort of, you know, oh, she was mean because would eat the olives off the pizza. And the other one would say, yeah, I did eat the olives off the pizza, and I accept that is completely unacceptable behaviour. And it will go through. So that's what a quickie divorce is.
I mean, based on what you were just saying, your advice really is, and your feeling is that you shouldn't get divorced at all. Is that a modern phenomenon, or is it just a convenience thing? Or, I mean, how does that fit into your thinking about divorce? If not taking a long time, should be thought out very carefully.
Absolutely. And it's practical. You know, there's no moral element to it, if I may. I know that you're a God-fearing fellow, Keith. Whereas God fears me, which is fine.
That I can well believe.
But no, Phil's completely right. Just you know, you could end up spending a huge amount of money on family lawyers and achieving very little as the consequence. Phil, we move on.
Yes, let's move on.
We've dealt with what I consider to be two parts of private family law. That is the divorce itself.
Yeah.
And the finances.
Yeah.
And the third part of private family law is arranging things for the children.
Quite so.
So that's where the two parties have children, they've separated, and questions arise as to where the children or child will live, and if they're living in one place, what contact they'd have with the other parent. And those are desperately fraught.
They are. The former is now called, as I understand it, residence. It used to be called custody, but it's now called residence. I know a bit about this because my nephew up north, the adopted son of my best friend, who rather misguidedly married one of my sisters, and it all went horribly wrong. And they fought tooth and nail over residence for Thomas, who is a Downs child as well, which was a complication, and what they now call contact, which used to be called access, didn't it? Or is it the other way around?
No, you're absolutely right. It's residence and contact.
And it can be very fraught. And I remember the phrase used all those years ago that children, with the best will in the world, the children are often used as matrimonial footballs.
Oh, completely. Absolutely, completely, no question. And one of the reasons that I gave up doing that sort of work, I don't do any private work at all, private family law work, is because I'd find myself on the 23rd of December over the road in the Royal Courts of Justice saying, right, okay, so pick up at Starbucks at what time did we say? Right, okay, and return at what time? And it was just hellish, because people would argue and argue and argue. Terrible.
Well, the real mischief is when the party who should be cooperating fails to cooperate and either doesn't turn up or keeps the child or the children long beyond the time, whichever part is, and well, it's invariably the bloke, I have to say, in my experience, but you know, when is he going to drop them back? And that causes enormous stress.
Yes.
For the mother, particularly.
Well, but also for the children, it can, because
yes,
children need a routine. And whilst in some cases, when they're very young, you can have shared residence. So a child will spend half the time with one, half the time with the other. By the time they get to school, that's, in my view, simply impractical, because they do need a routine and they need to know where home is.
absolutely. I mean, again, I do know of, and no doubt you do, and perhaps Keith does, perfectly amicable arrangements, almost informal arrangements that can work if the parents just are reasonable and see sense. But it's when they choose to use the children as weapons, almost, that it's very sad.
Yes. So don't get married. Don't get divorced. Don't have children. I'm glad that we've got the three don'ts there in relation to family private law.
I mean, I hope that genuinely that there is nobody of an impressionable age watching this program, because by the time we've finished, that individual will do nothing with his life, because it's all don'ts. Now, what's the fourth don't, Richard?
Philip, you're talking about yourself again in the third person.
Yes, I know I am, but you recognise that. And Keith is beginning to realise what I'm about. But so what's the fourth don't?
Your community psychiatric nurse will be in a minute, and the nice gentleman with the guitar and the nurse with a cup of tea. So just don't worry.
Well, my community psychiatric nurse has asked me for a divorce many times.
Yes.
And I've even given her the name of a solicitor who's my best friend, but it's never happened yet.
Well, a number of us did intervene in those proceedings because we didn't want you out on your own, because there was a risk that you'd want to come and visit us. So I'm afraid Mrs. M has to tolerate you. She's made her madman, and she has to lie on top of it. This is my view.
Correct. She would. Well, she always agrees with you anyway.
Exactly.
Whenever we have a discussion, a heated debate, should we say, she always says, "I'm going to ask Barton about this." Barton would say that. Barton would say this. He'd put you in your place. So give up.
Yeah.
Anyway, carry on.
So there isn't a fourth not. Probably I might come up with one, but we've dealt with the three main areas of private law. There's another little side bit, which is that people can obtain injunctions called, not rather old-fashioned term, non-molestation injunctions. So if somebody's being a bit unpleasant towards them, then that can be that's a civil injunction, but it can result. That's
the stuff I used to do a bit of.
Yeah. Do you know the first time I went over the road to Lewes Crown Court? It was the clerks "Oh, Mr. Bond, can you just nip down to Lewis? We got a non-mole down there," which is what they non-molestation. And I turned up over the road, first time ever, representing the ex-husband who had been deeply unpleasant to his ex-wife over the weekend. And I was in front of John Gower, the then resident judge. That's how long ago.
I remember him only too well.
Yeah. And I don't know why he was doing a family case. Savage judge. Absolutely savage, Keith. And I ended up having a sort of a backwards and forwards with him about it. And we made admissions, and he didn't stick my client in prison, albeit it was pretty borderline. And I remember walking back down Station Street, and I thought, people can be hanged in this town, I reckon. I reckon this is a lynching town, because I had such a bad time of it that I thought, oh, good grief, people playing the banjos in the background, diddling, ding, 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 ding. As
Deliverance, yes.
Yeah, exactly, quite, yeah.
Well, Mississippi Burning. My first experience across the road was an appeal against conviction.
Right.
The judge was Richard Brown, who I came to love, frankly.
Yeah.
And
he was when we say resident judge, we mean the senior judge. So John Gower was for many years the senior judge.
Yes, and he was the great patron and mentor for Richard Brown,
who then
himself became the resident judge. And when he retired, you may remember at his valedictory, he paid tribute to John Gower,
yes,
for all the help he'd given him in his career. But my first experience was Richard Brown as simply a circuit judge, and the appeal was responded to by Charlie Kemp. And I was a fish out of water. I wasn't even listened to. It was just before, I kid you not, before my backside had hit the seat in court 2, the words I heard were appeal dismissed.
You've never been appealing, Philip, it's got to be said.
Yeah, but I remember that very vividly. But another anecdote that, Richard, is, Keith, when I was a member of Westgate, of which Richard is now head and based in Brighton, we were originally up at the Westgate near the car park there at number 144, the old house as we came to know it.
Yes, yes. Sitting there rather lonely at the moment, I think.
Yeah.
Yes, well, yes, odd place, but many, many mixed memories for me. But our family clerk, a lady called Samaya, one morning I was in chambers and I had nothing to do. And she was tearing her hair out because she couldn't find a family practitioner to go down to Brighton Family Law Centre and take a judgment. In other words, go down there with a notebook and a pen and write down what the judge says. Okay? So I volunteered. And she was terribly grateful. So off I go to Brighton. This is as a non-family practitioner. I didn't even know what the case was about. I was told to hook up with the member of chambers whose case it was, who was also at the law centre, but was doing something far more important, who would tell me about the case. Well, that person avoided me like the plague because she loathed me. So I knew nothing about the case other than that it was a care case. In other words, it was the local authority seeking to put a variety of siblings into their care, resisted by the parents the Guardian ad litem, you name it. That's all I knew about it. And this particular judge, now retired, a lady family judge, was, I've now learned, notorious for her indecision. But I didn't know this. So I turn up, fish out of water, never been in the building before in my life, or the courtrooms. There were 5 advocates there, of which I was one. The only advocate that had been through the case completely was the local authority lady. The rest of us were just stand-ins. Nothing to do with the case at all, just to take the judgment. Well, we're all sitting there, a bit like, Al Capone, when he was in the film, Al Capone is waiting for his trial on fraud charges, and he's looking really smug and De Niro played him looking terribly smug because he knew that everything was rigged. The judge had been paid off, the jury had been paid off, and he just knew he was going nowhere. And suddenly the judge announced, right, this case is being switched to courtroom 1 with a different judge and jury. And Capone went mental at his lawyers because he knew he was in trouble. Well, it was a bit like that because in came the judge in a right fluster, late, about 15 minutes late. In a
Phil,
right state.
You're doing a Ronnie Corbett, mate. Come on.
Well, stop interrupting me then. And she came in and said, counsel, I need further submissions because I can't make up my mind. So 4 of us, not the local authority lady, 4 of us. Well, I nearly fell off my seat, to be honest. Thinking, I can't do this. And it was actually the local authority lady who pointed out to the judge that the rest of us were just total wastes of space. And mercifully, it was put off to another date. But it was the most scary moment of 43 years at the bar, frankly. But there we are.
I think I've told you this story, Philip, and I may have told the one man and his dog this story, but when I was second 6 pupil, so I was on my feet. In other words, I was working, but wasn't yet a tenant. But in fact, my then chambers had made a decision on me and said, yeah, we're going to give you a tenancy. Fantastic. So I took 3 or 4 friends out for lunch to up Lamb's Cundit Street.
Oh yes. What the sun and the moon?
I can't remember where it was, but you could imagine there was a level of quaffing going on, and my clerks
unimaginable.
Yeah, my clerks had acquired a job lot of these brick mobile telephones. I'm talking 1990 here. And the bloody thing went off. And I answered it. And they said, your pupil supervisor, who was a very eminent family practitioner who became a family High Court judge later, has been taken unwell. Can you just go and take judgment in front of the president of the family division? I said, I can tell you I can do that. So I phoned him up, and he said, and he was no coward. He really was. Dear boy, so good of you to cover this case for me. But I should tell you this, because I've been unwell, there are 3 points that I haven't made to the president.
Oh, no.
He told me what they were, and I wrote them down on the napkin in the restaurant. And then went down to the Royal Courts of Justice in front of the president of the family division. And as with you, there must have been 7 counsel in this case. And he was a nice chap called Potter, was the president at the time. So he put up with me sort of staggering up on my hind legs and going, Lord, Councillor is indisposed, but wishes me to make the following 3 points.
No, you haven't told me that. What?
Yeah.
No, I'm glad to have heard that for the first time with the man and his dog, because that's really funny.
Yeah.
In hindsight.
At the time, can you imagine? It was.
Well, I can imagine. And I can imagine it felt worse once you'd sobered up too.
Yeah, because as far as I was concerned, I was out for lunch. There was no way I was going to be doing any work that afternoon. I'd done something in the morning. Why not go and have a sherbet or two with your mates to celebrate the fact that you've got a tenancy? Of course.
Sure.
Yeah. Anyway, Keith, I'm aware of the time. It may well be that we need to hold off on the subject of care proceedings because it's a bigger subject, and that's what within family law is sometimes referred to as public law. So the 3 areas that we've dealt with are all referred to as private law because it involves private individuals litigating against each other, whereas public law, as Phil has referred to, involves local authorities. It's a very significant area, in particular at the moment. And
well, I think we should reserve that for the next thrilling episode of the 2Bs.
Right.
Yeah, and of course it's to a certain extent a hot topic because of a range of relatively high-profile cases where young children have been either hurt or sadly killed at times. So if the dog doesn't want to hear that, then take the dog for a walk is what I suggest.
I wonder
Yes.
if we could just end off this morning because I'd like to ask the two of you about rule of law. I'm quite passionate about rule of law, and I've spent some time working with some of your eminent colleagues in the Balkans and the Baltics and so on, pursuing this in areas that have been fairly lawless as far as the constitution is concerned. But I am particularly concerned at these protest groups who climb onto the Prime Minister's house. Protesting in the street and being a bit naughty with the traffic is one thing, but actually breaking the law deliberately and being very happy about it and saying, our protest is worth it, that bothers me deeply that we are not clamping down enough in our own country, in our own society, on the issue of rule of law. Am I way out in left field?
It's an interesting point, and at one stage, Keith, I will give you a lecture on jurisprudence, and I will tell you, I would, which is the theory of law, which I did at one stage teach in the same way that Phil did his stuff. I think the rule of law is a bit like human rights, because it's not actually a solution. It's a conclusion that people come to when they want a particular answer. So one person's rule of law might be another person's rule of misrule law. So I think it's a very slippery concept. I can see the point about the specifics. I fully understand that people shouldn't be breaking into other people's property. How on earth they got into the Prime Minister's home, I don't know.
Well, it was on the roof. My understanding is it was on the roof.
It was on the roof, but it's a terrible lapse of security.
No. My answer to Keith's question, my side of this is, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, Richard, as ever, you have a brain like a planet, and your way of thinking and learning is well beyond mine. But my rather practical reaction, which is what it was when I saw this on the news this morning, is that it has to be stopped or reacted to firmly. There are charges available to those who have been arrested. But the thing is, you and I know, having dealt with these weirdos for all these years for different reasons, whether it's transporting sheep, oil, petrol, whatever, an activist is an activist, and it's very hard to stop them unless you bang them up. So, Keith, it's not that the rule of law doesn't exist. And if they charge them properly, they should be condignly dealt with. But these are activists.
I worry about the will of the people in dealing with it.
Well, the will of the people should be what the law represents. And the way the law is applied should be, rather like the democratic process, should be, in theory, what the will of the people is. And I would like to think that the vast majority of people, old, middle-aged or young, would not find it funny that our own Prime Minister's house is being sat on and daubed with stuff by these Burks. And as Richard rightly says, it comes down to security. I mean, how did they even know where he lived? I just don't get it. But there we are.
Yeah.
Anyway, Keith, you, I know, will now have sleepless nights. You won't be able to wait for Richard's lecture on jurisprudence.
Indeed, I'm on tenterhooks about the whole thing. I'm just flipping through my diary now.
Yes, I can sense the excitement.
We might get one man and two dogs. You never know.
Well, the dogs will know more about jurisprudence than I do, put it that way.
Certainly my one does. Yeah.
Gentlemen, another good hour to end the week on a Friday. We started off much in the same vein on a Monday, which is always my delight to have you as the parenthesis of an interesting week. So thank you both for being with me this morning. And I look forward to you getting up early again on Monday and coming and joining me then.
Well, we're both early birds, actually, so that's never a problem.
Good. Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
And bye, Philip. Okay. Now, have you got a long way to go this morning? Just across the road. Right. So if I keep my eye on the steps, I can see you coming out either looking triumphant or otherwise.
Yeah, I think otherwise. And I'm just going to leave my stuff here if that's okay.
Yes, that's fine.
Lovely. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Richard. As usual, stimulating hour, a bit of fun, a bit of be careful, a bit of information. And generally speaking, a good way to start Friday. So we'll say toodle pip, and we'll see you on Monday. We'll say toodle pip if I can find the toodle pip button. Here we go.